The fluorescent lights of Jackson's Market hummed overhead as Officer David Logan adjusted his radio. The familiar weight of his service weapon balanced against the lighter presence of Blaze's leash in his left hand. It was supposed to be a routine community check, the kind of friendly patrol that built trust between law enforcement and neighborhood families. The German shepherd beside him moved with practiced precision, 5 years of partnership having forged an unbreakable bond between man and dog that transcended mere training. Blaze's ears twitched at every sound, his dark eyes scanning the parking lot with the methodical attention of a seasoned detective. The autumn air carried the scent of dying leaves and distant wood smoke, peaceful indicators of a quiet Thursday afternoon in suburban Oregon. Inside the market, shoppers moved through their daily routines, mothers corralling toddlers past colorful displays, teenagers debating snack choices, elderly couples comparing grocery lists with the careful deliberation of decades together. The sliding glass doors whispered open and closed in their mechanical rhythm, admitting streams of golden sunlight that painted geometric patterns across the polished floor. David had walked this beat countless times, knew the store manager by name, recognized the regulars who nodded respectfully when they saw his uniform. Nothing about this moment suggested that their lives were about to intersect with something darker than anyone could imagine. Blaze suddenly stopped walking, his entire body freezing in a way that made David's pulse quicken instantly. The dog's hackles rose like a ridge of warning along his spine, his chest producing a rumble so low and threatening that nearby shoppers instinctively stepped back. David followed his partner's unwavering gaze through the store windows, past the mundane displays of seasonal produce and promotional banners, searching for whatever had triggered this primal response. What he saw looked ordinary enough. A man in his late 30s wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his features, dark jeans, and a faded plaid shirt that had seen better days. He was holding a small child, perhaps 2 years old, her blonde curls catching the overhead lighting as she rested against his shoulder with unsettling stillness. The moment David released Blaze's leash and gave the pursuit command, the grocery store erupted into chaos that would haunt him for months afterward. The German shepherd moved like a guided missile through aisles of startled shoppers, his powerful legs propelling him past overturned displays and scattered merchandise with the focused intensity of a predator locked onto prey. The man carrying the child had already reached the far end of the store, his movements too quick and purposeful for someone simply shopping with a sick niece as he'd claimed. David's boots pounded against the linoleum as he followed Blaze's path of determined destruction through the dairy section, his radio crackling with dispatch confirmations that backup was en route. The little girl remained eerily motionless in the suspect's arms, her small body limp in a way that defied natural child behavior. No crying or struggling or signs of awareness that would be expected from a toddler in such a chaotic situation. When Blaze finally cornered the man near the pharmacy section, the confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds, but those moments revealed something that made David's blood run cold with recognition. As the suspect hit the floor under Blaze's calculated takedown, the child rolled safely to one side, her eyes blinking with the slow confusion of someone emerging from artificial sleep. David cuffed the man while calling for medical assistance, but it was what he found in the suspect's jacket pocket that transformed this from a simple kidnapping case into something far more sinister. Hidden in the lining was a hand-drawn map marking several remote locations across 3 states, each marked with numbers that corresponded to what looked like inventory codes. More disturbing was the small notebook containing names paired with ages and physical descriptions, written in the methodical handwriting of someone keeping meticulous records. The man refused to provide identification, claimed his name was Mark Johnson, but when David ran the information through national databases, no such person existed in any official capacity. As the hours passed, and federal agents arrived to take over the investigation, one detail continued to gnaw at David's consciousness with increasing urgency. The little girl, now identified as Lily Henderson, who had been missing from Idaho for over 2 months, kept repeating one phrase that made no sense until David realized its terrifying implication. She whispered that there were others, other children, and that the man with the broken tooth would be coming for them soon. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel K9 Loyal, Souls, where we uncover true stories of animals' bravery you won't believe until you see it. In the sprawling landscape of American law enforcement, few partnerships command as much respect and awe as the bond between a K9 officer and their 4-legged partner. These aren't just dogs trained to follow commands. They're elite operatives whose senses have been honed to detect what human perception cannot grasp, whose instincts can mean the difference between life and death in situations where seconds matter more than anything else in the world. Officer David Logan had spent 15 years wearing the badge, but it wasn't until he met Blaze, a 5-year-old German shepherd with intelligence that bordered on supernatural, that he truly understood what it meant to serve and protect. Their partnership had been forged through countless hours of training, late-night calls that tested their endurance, and moments of genuine danger where trust became the only currency that mattered. Blaze wasn't just a dog. He was a detective with 4 legs and a nose capable of detecting scents that lingered for days, emotions that humans tried to hide, and dangers that existed beyond the realm of ordinary perception. The Pacific Northwest provided the backdrop for their work, a region where dense forests and remote highways created perfect hiding spots for those who preferred to operate in shadows. Small towns dotted the landscape like islands of normalcy, connected by winding roads that could conceal secrets for decades if nobody knew where to look. It was a place where a child could disappear without a trace, where predators could move freely between jurisdictions, and where the line between civilization and wilderness blurred in ways that made law enforcement particularly challenging. David had seen enough in his career to know that evil rarely announced itself with dramatic flourishes. Instead, it wore ordinary faces, drove unremarkable vehicles, and hid behind the mundane routines of everyday life. But what he was about to discover would challenge everything he thought he knew about the scope of human cruelty and the lengths some people would go to exploit the most vulnerable members of society. This is the story of how one routine patrol call in a suburban grocery store would expose a trafficking network that spanned multiple states, endangered dozens of children, and ultimately proved that sometimes the most unlikely heroes come with 4 legs, keen instincts, and an unwavering loyalty to justice that puts human dedication to shame. It's a reminder that in a world where darkness seems to be gaining ground, there are still those willing to chase it into the deepest corners and drag it into the light, no matter the personal cost or the dangers they face along the way. The statistics paint a grim picture of child trafficking in America, with thousands of cases reported annually and countless more that never surface in official records. These crimes often target society's most vulnerable populations, children from broken homes, foster care systems, undocumented families, and rural communities where a missing child might not trigger immediate widespread searches. The perpetrators understand these vulnerabilities and exploit them with calculated precision, moving their victims across state lines to confuse jurisdictions and complicate investigations. What makes cases like these particularly challenging is the sophisticated nature of modern trafficking operations, which often involve multiple individuals working in coordinated networks, using technology and transportation systems to stay ahead of law enforcement efforts that are hampered by bureaucratic boundaries and limited resources. Federal agencies work tirelessly to combat these crimes, but the scale and complexity of the problem demands innovative approaches and sometimes relies on unexpected heroes who possess skills that human investigators simply cannot match. The partnership between David and Blaze represents something rare in law enforcement, a combination of human determination and canine instinct that creates possibilities beyond what either could achieve alone. Their story begins on what seemed like an ordinary Thursday afternoon. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Jackson's Market as David Logan guided his patrol cruiser into a space near the main entrance, the familiar routine of community policing feeling almost meditative after years of practice. Blaze shifted in the passenger seat, his dark eyes scanning the steady flow of shoppers emerging with grocery bags and children in tow, his ears rotating like satellite dishes attuned to frequencies beyond human perception. The store represented everything David loved about their beat, a neighborhood hub where families gathered, where teenagers found their first jobs, and where elderly residents could count on seeing friendly faces who knew their names and asked about their grandchildren. David clipped Blaze's leash and stepped out into air that carried the mingled scents of autumn leaves, fresh bread from the bakery, and the faint exhaust of cars navigating the busy intersection nearby. Inside the store, the familiar symphony of commerce played out in its predictable rhythms, shopping cart wheels squeaking across polished floors, checkout scanners beeping their electronic melodies, and the gentle hum of conversations between neighbors catching up. On local news, the fluorescent lighting created a warm, welcoming atmosphere that made the market feel more like a community center than a commercial establishment. Exactly the kind of place where Officer Logan and his K-9 partner could build positive relationships with citizens who might otherwise view law enforcement with suspicion or fear. Blaze walked beside him with the confidence of a dog who had spent countless hours in public spaces, his training evident in the way he navigated around, shopping carts and small children, without losing focus on his primary responsibility of observation and protection. The sliding glass doors whispered open to admit them into an environment that should have felt completely safe, filled with families making dinner plans, workers grabbing quick lunches, and retired couples slowly deliberating over produce selections with the luxury of unhurried time. David nodded to the store manager behind the customer service counter, exchanged pleasantries with a school crossing guard he recognized from the elementary school down the street, and felt the deep satisfaction that comes from being genuinely welcomed in the community you serve. But Blaze's behavior began to change in ways so subtle that only someone with years of partnership experience would notice the shift from relaxed alertness to something approaching predatory focus. His stride became more deliberate, his head lowered slightly as his nostrils worked to process information that his human partner couldn't access, and his tail straightened into a rigid line that David had learned to recognize as a warning signal that demanded immediate attention. The transformation happened gradually, then suddenly, like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon before unleashing their fury without warning. David felt his own pulse quicken in response to his partner's mounting tension, years of trust teaching him that when Blaze sensed danger, the threat was real, regardless of whether it was immediately visible to human observation. The dog's hackles began to rise along his spine, creating a ridge of bristling fur that made him appear larger and more formidable, while his chest produced a rumbling growl so low that nearby shoppers instinctively stepped back, without fully understanding why they felt compelled to create distance. Following Blaze's unwavering gaze through the store's interior, David's eyes landed on what appeared to be an ordinary scene that should have triggered no alarm whatsoever. A man shopping with a small child, the kind of sight that represented normalcy and family life in communities across America. The man holding the child moved with calculated efficiency that immediately confirmed Blaze's instincts, his pace quickening in a way that suggested practiced escape routes rather than casual shopping behavior. David's hand instinctively moved to his radio as he watched the suspect navigate through aisles with the purposeful movement of someone who had studied the store's layout and planned multiple exit strategies. The little girl in his arms remained unnaturally still, her small body limp against his shoulder, in a way that defied every natural instinct a 2-year-old should possess when surrounded by chaos and loud noises. Her blonde curls caught the fluorescent lighting as her head lolled to one side, and David felt a chill of recognition that spoke to something far more sinister than a simple kidnapping attempt. When the man suddenly bolted toward the back of the store, David released Blaze's leash and gave the pursuit command that transformed his partner from community ambassador to elite law enforcement weapon in the span of a heartbeat. The German Shepherd exploded into motion with the precision of a guided missile, his powerful hindquarters propelling him through the store with devastating efficiency, while his training guided him around obstacles and innocent bystanders who scattered in confusion and terror. Shopping. Carts overturned in his wake, spilling their contents across polished floors as elderly shoppers pressed themselves against display cases and mothers grabbed their children protectively. The suspect's attempt to escape through the dairy section proved futile against an opponent who could cover ground at twice his speed while maintaining perfect focus on the target. Blaze's takedown was textbook perfect, a controlled collision that brought the man to the ground without endangering the child, who rolled safely to one side as David arrived to secure the scene. The entire pursuit had lasted less than 90 seconds, but those moments revealed details that would haunt David for months afterward. The child's eyes opened slowly, blinking with the confused lethargy of someone emerging from artificial sleep, and when she looked around the store, there was no recognition of where she was or how she had arrived there. David cuffed the suspect while calling for medical assistance, but his attention remained focused on the little girl who sat quietly on the floor, showing none of the emotional distress that would be expected from a toddler in such circumstances. The man refused to provide identification beyond claiming his name was Mark Johnson. A story that began to unravel the moment David ran the information through national databases and found no matching records. No social security number, no driver's license, no employment history, no address, nothing that would indicate this person existed in any official capacity anywhere in the United States. The suspect's clothing told its own story to someone trained to notice details: fabric that had been worn for days without washing, shoes that showed evidence of long-distance travel across varied terrain, and pockets that contained items suggesting extended time away from any permanent residence. When backup arrived and began securing the scene, David discovered something in the man's jacket that transformed this from a local incident into something with implications that stretched across multiple state lines. Hidden in the lining was a carefully folded piece of paper containing a hand-drawn map marked with locations, dates, and numbers that suggested systematic planning and coordination with others. The map showed rest stops, truck depots, and remote areas along major interstate highways, each location marked with notations that looked like inventory codes rather than travel directions. More disturbing was a small notebook containing names paired with ages and physical descriptions, written in the methodical handwriting of someone keeping detailed records for purposes that David didn't want to contemplate. The interrogation room at the precinct felt smaller than usual as David sat across from a man who had mastered the art of silence, his eyes cold and calculating, despite being caught red-handed with evidence that suggested far more than a simple kidnapping attempt. Every question met with blank stares, every attempt at building rapport dismissed with the practiced indifference of someone who had prepared for this moment and accepted it as an occupational hazard. The suspect's fingerprints had been run through every federal and interstate database available to law enforcement, producing absolutely no matches despite the sophisticated scanning technology that could identify individuals from partial prints decades old. Agent Russell from the Missing Children's Task Force arrived within hours, bringing with him resources and expertise that elevated the case from local concern to federal investigation. The little girl, now identified through careful questioning and photographs as Lily Henderson, had been missing from her grandmother's backyard in Idaho for over 2 months, taken while playing with toys, as her guardian worked in the garden nearby. What made the case particularly tragic was that no official Amber Alert had been issued because of custody complications and the grandmother's legal status, allowing the crime to slip through bureaucratic cracks that predators understood how to exploit. Russell spread photographs across the conference table, each image representing a child who had vanished under similar circumstances, taken from families who lacked the resources or legal standing to generate widespread media attention or law enforcement response. The pattern became clear as more details emerged from federal databases: children disappearing from rural communities, foster care facilities, undocumented families, and situations where complicated custody arrangements delayed official reporting. These weren't random crimes of opportunity, but calculated selections based on vulnerability assessment and reduced likelihood of immediate comprehensive search efforts. The jacket's hidden map corresponded to locations where other suspicious activities had been reported over the past 18 months. Sightings of men with children who didn't match family resemblances, unusual traffic at remote rest stops during late-night hours, and reports of refrigerated trucks in areas where no legitimate commercial deliveries should occur. Laboratory analysis of fabric samples from the suspect's clothing revealed traces of sedatives typically used in veterinary applications, chemicals that could render a small child unconscious for hours without causing immediately obvious symptoms. The discovery suggested a level of planning and medical knowledge that indicated professional involvement rather than amateur criminal activity. Russell explained that trafficking networks had evolved into sophisticated operations that used legitimate transportation infrastructure to move victims across jurisdictions, exploiting gaps in communication between law enforcement agencies and taking advantage of legal complexities that made prosecution difficult even when arrests occurred. The suspect's silence began to make tactical sense when viewed as part of a larger strategy designed to protect higher-level participants in an organization that valued loyalty above individual welfare. Polygraph examination proved impossible because the man displayed psychological profiles consistent with antisocial personality disorders that made traditional lie detection methods unreliable. His clothing, behavior, and physical condition suggested someone accustomed to living off the grid for extended periods, moving frequently, and maintaining minimal contact with conventional society. The investigation revealed that Lily's case was connected to at least 6 other missing children across 3 states, all taken under circumstances that made immediate detection and response unlikely. Each disappearance had been attributed to family disputes, runaway situations, or jurisdictional confusion that delayed coordinated search efforts until trails had gone cold and evidence had been destroyed or contaminated by time and weather. The evidence room became David's second office as he methodically examined every item recovered from the suspect's possession, each piece potentially holding clues that could lead to other victims still trapped somewhere in a network that seemed to span half the American West. Blaze had developed an unusual attachment to the man's jacket, sitting beside the evidence locker for hours, and occasionally whimpering in a way that suggested he could detect something human senses couldn't process. The dog's behavior convinced David that crucial information remained hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone persistent enough to discover what conventional investigation methods had missed. Working late into the night, David carefully examined the jacket's construction, feeling along seams and checking pockets that had already been searched multiple times by federal agents and forensic specialists. His persistence paid off when he discovered that the lining felt thicker in certain areas, suggesting something had been sewn into the fabric itself. Using a utility knife, he carefully opened a seam and extracted a folded piece of paper that had been so carefully concealed it had escaped earlier detection efforts. The paper contained a crudely drawn map showing highways, rest stops, and geographical landmarks, with a red X marking a location called Silver Pine Rest Stop, approximately 3 hours north of their current position. The map included handwritten notes in a code that used numbers and abbreviations, but one notation was clear enough to make David's blood run cold with recognition of its implications. Written in small, neat handwriting were the words "pickup scheduled," followed by a date that was only 2 days away. The discovery meant that whatever operation they had disrupted was still active, with other participants expecting deliveries or exchanges that could involve additional children currently being held somewhere in the network. David immediately contacted Agent Russell, who confirmed that Silver Pine Rest Stop was located in a remote area near the Idaho border, surrounded by dense forest and accessible only by back roads that would make surveillance difficult and escape routes numerous. The location had been flagged in previous investigations as a possible waypoint for drug trafficking, but no concrete evidence had ever been developed to support extended surveillance or investigation efforts. Federal resources were stretched thin across multiple concurrent operations, meaning that David and Blaze would need to conduct initial reconnaissance to determine whether the location warranted full task force deployment. The drive north took them through increasingly isolated terrain where cell phone coverage became intermittent and the distance between populated areas stretched to dozens of miles. Blaze sensed the importance of their mission, sitting alert in the passenger seat and scanning the landscape with the focused attention of a soldier entering enemy territory. The Silver Pine Rest Stop proved to be exactly the kind of place criminals would choose for clandestine activities, isolated enough to avoid casual observation, but accessible to interstate highways for quick transportation of goods or people. The facility consisted of a single gas pump that looked like it hadn't functioned in years, a vending machine with cracked glass, and a picnic table under pine trees that provided natural camouflage for anyone who wanted to conduct business away from public view. David parked behind a row of bushes and released Blaze without a leash, trusting his partner's training and instincts to guide their search of the area. The German shepherd immediately began working scent trails, his nose low to the ground as he methodically covered the entire rest stop before moving into the wooded area behind the facilities. When Blaze suddenly stopped and barked once, David knew they had found something significant that would advance their understanding of how the trafficking network operated and where other victims might be held. The wooded area behind Silver Pine Rest Stop held secrets that had been carefully concealed beneath layers of fallen leaves, pine needles, and the natural camouflage that made remote locations perfect for activities that couldn't withstand public scrutiny. Blaze led David approximately 50 yards into the forest before stopping at what appeared to be a natural depression in the ground. his body language indicating the presence of something that demanded immediate human attention and investigation. David's flashlight revealed tire tracks that had been partially obscured by recent rainfall, but were still clear enough to indicate that large vehicles had been accessing this location regularly over an extended period. The tracks were too wide for passenger cars and showed the distinctive tread patterns of commercial or industrial vehicles, possibly the refrigerated trucks that had been mentioned in other aspects of the investigation. Clearing away leaves and debris, David discovered a piece of blue plastic that turned out to be a wristband similar to those used in hospitals or summer camps, but this one bore the number 16 and appeared to have been discarded recently. The discovery confirmed that children had been processed through this location using some kind of identification system that reduced them to inventory numbers rather than human beings with names, families, and futures that had been stolen from them. The wristband led to additional evidence buried in the surrounding area: fragments of clothing that had been cut away, empty food containers that suggested people had been held here for extended periods, and most disturbing of all, a section of ground that showed signs of having been excavated and refilled multiple times. David called for backup and a full forensic team, but while waiting for additional resources to arrive, he and Blaze continued their systematic search of the immediate area. What they found beneath a moss-covered boulder changed everything they thought they understood about the scope and sophistication of the trafficking operation they had stumbled upon during what should have been a routine community patrol. Hidden beneath plywood that had been carefully camouflaged with natural materials was a concrete hatch that provided access to an underground facility that had been constructed with professional skill and attention to detail that indicated significant financial investment. The entrance led to a series of concrete rooms that had been equipped with basic necessities for holding multiple people for extended periods, including sleeping areas, primitive sanitation facilities, and a ventilation system that prevented the underground complex from being detected by aerial surveillance or casual observation. The walls showed evidence of recent occupation, with children's drawings scratched into the concrete and messages that provided heartbreaking glimpses into the experiences of victims who had been held in this nightmare facility. One drawing showed a brown and black dog that bore an unmistakable resemblance to Blaze, suggesting that word of the canine's involvement in rescuing children had spread through the network and provided hope to victims who had no other reason to believe that rescue was possible. The underground complex contained evidence that at least 12 children had been held there simultaneously, based on sleeping arrangements, personal items, and the systematic organization that suggested careful planning and management by people with experience in controlling large groups. Most disturbing were the medical supplies and equipment that indicated victims had been sedated, treated for injuries, and prepared for transportation to other locations using methods that demonstrated knowledge of child psychology and physical needs during extended captivity. The facility's location made it nearly impossible to detect from conventional surveillance methods, accessible only through the forest entrance that could be easily concealed and defended if necessary. David realized that they had discovered not just a way station in a trafficking network, but a sophisticated operation that had been running successfully for months or possibly years, processing dozens of children through a system that treated them as cargo rather than human beings deserving of protection and care. The underground facility yielded its most precious secret when David heard a whisper emanating from the darkest corner of the concrete chamber, a voice so fragile and frightened that it barely registered as human communication in the oppressive silence that had settled over the hidden complex. Following the sound with his flashlight, David discovered a 6-year-old boy huddled behind a pile of dirty blankets, his eyes wide with terror and confusion as he struggled to understand whether the uniformed officer represented salvation or another threat in a world that had taught him to fear adults who made promises they never intended to keep. The child's name was Toby Wren, and he had been missing from a shelter parking lot in Utah for 6 weeks, vanishing while his mother completed paperwork inside the building and leaving behind no witnesses or clues that could guide search efforts in any productive direction. Toby's presence in the underground facility confirmed that the trafficking network was actively transporting children across multiple states, using remote locations like Silver Pine as temporary holding points while arranging transfers to other destinations that remained unknown to law enforcement agencies, working independently without coordination or shared intelligence. The boy's physical condition told a story of prolonged captivity that included adequate nutrition to keep him healthy, but psychological trauma that would require months or years of specialized treatment to address properly. He spoke in whispers about other children who had been held in the same facility, describing a system where victims were identified by numbers rather than names and moved frequently enough to prevent them from forming relationships or developing detailed knowledge of their surroundings. According to Toby's fragmented recollections, the facility had housed as many as 8 children simultaneously during his time there, with arrivals and departures occurring at irregular intervals that suggested coordination with transportation schedules and demand from whatever destinations served as final stops in the trafficking pipeline. The boy's descriptions matched evidence found throughout the underground complex, including personal items that belonged to other children, drawings that depicted different faces and ages, and sleeping arrangements that could accommodate the numbers he remembered. Most significantly, Toby provided the first eyewitness identification of their silent suspect, recognizing him as the man who brought food and supervised the children during their captivity, though he insisted that someone else, a man with a broken tooth, was clearly in charge of the entire operation. This revelation confirmed David's growing suspicion that their arrest had captured a mid-level operative rather than the person directing the trafficking network, someone expendable enough to accept capture as an occupational hazard while protecting more valuable members of the organization. The rescue triggered a massive federal response that included FBI agents, child psychologists, forensic specialists, and resources from multiple agencies that had been tracking similar cases across the western United States. Toby's debriefing provided crucial intelligence about the network's operations, including details about vehicles used for transportation, approximate travel times between facilities, and the systematic methods used to control and process victims through what amounted to an assembly line of human suffering. The boy's testimony also revealed that children were being prepared for different destinations based on characteristics that he didn't fully understand, but that clearly involved age, appearance, and behavioral compliance with the demands of their captors. Each piece of information painted a picture of an organization that had studied law enforcement methods and designed their operations to exploit weaknesses in interagency communication, jurisdictional boundaries, and the legal complexities that made prosecution difficult even when arrests occurred. David realized that Toby's rescue represented both a victory and a challenge, saving one child while revealing the existence of many others who remained trapped somewhere in a network that extended far beyond what they had initially imagined when Blaze first sensed danger at Jackson's Market. The investigation took on new urgency when analysis of evidence from the underground facility revealed references to someone identified only as Ellis, a name that appeared in coded messages, scratched into walls by victims, and mentioned in Toby's fragmented recollections of conversations he had overheard during his captivity. Federal databases eventually matched the name to Aaron Ellis, a career criminal with a history of weapons trafficking and a talent for disappearing between prison sentences that had made him nearly impossible for law enforcement to track using conventional methods. Ellis possessed the kind of criminal resume that made him ideally suited for running a trafficking network, combining violence, organizational skills, and connections to transportation infrastructure that could move contraband across state lines without attracting official attention. His last known address had been invalidated months earlier, and attempts to locate him through family members, known associates, and previous employers yielded nothing but dead ends and people who claimed no knowledge of his current activities or whereabouts. The breakthrough came when David discovered that Ellis had been using the underground facility as more than just a way station for transporting children, based on evidence that suggested he had been living there periodically, and treating it as a headquarters for coordinating activities across multiple states. Personal items found in a concealed storage area included clothing, toiletries, and most importantly, a collection of burner phones that contained contact information for people and locations throughout the Pacific Northwest. Forensic analysis of the phones revealed a pattern of communications that corresponded to dates when children had been reported missing from various jurisdictions, suggesting that Ellis was receiving orders or coordinating with buyers who requested specific types of victims for purposes that law enforcement preferred not to contemplate in detail. The phones also contained GPS data that showed Ellis had been traveling regularly between predetermined locations along interstate highways, following routes that avoided major metropolitan areas where law enforcement presence was heavier and surveillance systems were more comprehensive. Agent Russell coordinated with state police agencies to establish surveillance at truck stops, rest areas, and remote locations that matched the travel patterns indicated by Ellis's phone records, but the operation required resources from multiple jurisdictions and careful timing to avoid alerting the target that law enforcement was closing in on his activities. David and Blaze were assigned to a surveillance team monitoring a truck depot near the Oregon-Idaho border, where Ellis had apparently conducted business on several occasions, according to cell phone tower data that placed him in the area during times that coincided with other suspicious activities. The stakeout required patience and attention to detail that tested everyone involved, watching for vehicles that matched descriptions provided by witnesses, monitoring communications traffic, and coordinating with other teams positioned at locations throughout the region. After 3 days of surveillance that yielded nothing but false alarms and dead ends, Blaze suddenly became alert while they were positioned near a diesel fuel station that served commercial vehicles traveling between major cities. The dog's behavior indicated that he had detected something significant, possibly a scent that connected to evidence from previous crime scenes or individuals they had encountered during the investigation. David trusted his partner's instincts completely and requested permission to follow up on whatever had triggered Blaze's response, even though conventional surveillance methods had detected nothing unusual about the location or the people using the facility. The decision proved crucial when Blaze led them to a refrigerated trailer that had been parked behind the main building, apparently waiting for a driver who was inside the facility conducting business or resting between long-distance hauls that could transport cargo across multiple states without attracting attention from authorities who focused primarily on passenger vehicles and obvious criminal activity. The refrigerated trailer behind the diesel station contained evidence that transformed the investigation from a regional concern into a federal priority that demanded resources from agencies across multiple states and coordination at the highest levels of law enforcement. Inside the trailer, forensic specialists discovered a sophisticated mobile holding facility equipped with restraints, monitoring equipment, and climate control systems designed to transport human cargo across long distances while maintaining the appearance of legitimate commercial activity. The trailer's registration led to a shell company with connections to other vehicles that had been flagged in missing persons cases throughout the western United States, revealing a transportation network that had been operating successfully for years while avoiding detection through careful route planning and legitimate business cover stories. Aaron Ellis had been using the refrigerated truck system to move children between facilities, with the trailer serving as both transportation and temporary holding during extended journeys that could last several days depending on destinations and delivery schedules. GPS tracking data recovered from the vehicle's electronic systems showed regular travel patterns between predetermined locations, including an RV park outside Pocatello, Idaho, where Ellis had apparently established another operational base using false identification and cash payments that avoided creating paper trails. The RV park represented a perfect cover for someone who needed to remain mobile while maintaining access to transportation infrastructure and communication systems necessary for coordinating complex criminal operations across multiple jurisdictions. David and Blaze were assigned to investigate the Pocatello location, while federal agents followed other leads that had emerged from analysis of Ellis's communication records and financial transactions. The drive to Idaho took them through increasingly remote terrain, where law enforcement presence was minimal and opportunities for criminal activity were limited only by imagination and resources rather than fear of detection or intervention. The RV park proved to be exactly the kind of establishment that attracted people who preferred anonymity over comfort, offering basic amenities and minimal supervision in exchange for cash payments that generated no official records or background checks. The park manager remembered Ellis clearly, describing him as a quiet tenant who kept irregular hours and received visitors at unusual times, always conducting business away from other residents and avoiding interactions that might create memorable impressions or lasting relationships. According to the manager's recollections, Ellis had rented the same site on multiple occasions over the past year, arriving with different vehicles and sometimes accompanied by children who appeared nervous and stayed close to him at all times. The description matched witness accounts from other locations where Ellis had been spotted, confirming that he was systematically using commercial facilities to establish temporary bases while moving victims through a network that spanned hundreds of miles and multiple states. Blaze immediately detected scent traces that indicated Ellis had been at the location recently, possibly within the previous week, based on the intensity of the dog's reaction to specific areas around the former campsite. The German Shepherd's nose led them to a section of ground where something had been buried and recently excavated, revealing disturbed soil that contained fragments of children's clothing and personal items that suggested Ellis had been destroying evidence before abandoning the location. Most significantly, they discovered a torn receipt that provided crucial intelligence about Ellis's current movements and possible destination, time-stamped from a gas station in Stanley, Idaho, only hours before their arrival at the RV park. The receipt indicated that Ellis was continuing to move north, possibly heading toward remote areas near the Canadian border, where law enforcement resources were stretched thin and opportunities for crossing international boundaries without detection were numerous enough to make apprehension extremely difficult without advance intelligence and careful coordination. The trail from Stanley led David and Blaze through increasingly desolate terrain where civilization gave way to wilderness and the distance between potential hiding places stretched across miles of forest, mountain passes, and abandoned facilities that provided perfect concealment for someone determined to avoid detection by conventional search methods. Intelligence gathered from Ellis's communication records indicated that he was heading toward a specific destination rather than fleeing randomly, suggesting that the trafficking network included facilities and resources that had been prepared in advance for exactly this type of emergency evacuation scenario. Federal agents had identified several possible locations where Ellis might attempt to establish a new base of operations, including abandoned mining camps, closed logging facilities, and remote recreational areas that were accessible by vehicle but isolated enough to conduct illegal activities without fear of accidental discovery by civilians or routine law enforcement patrols. The search expanded to include helicopter surveillance, satellite imagery analysis, and coordination with Canadian authorities who were monitoring border crossing points for suspicious activity that might indicate Ellis was attempting to flee international jurisdiction. David's team was assigned to investigate reports of unusual activity near an abandoned campground that had been closed for years following environmental concerns but remained accessible through back roads that connected to major transportation corridors. The campground's isolation made it an ideal location for someone who needed to remain hidden while maintaining access to escape routes that could facilitate quick departure if law enforcement presence was detected in the area. Blaze's reaction to the location was immediate and intense, indicating that Ellis had definitely been there and possibly remained in the vicinity, despite the obvious risks associated with staying in one place for extended periods. The German Shepherd led them through the abandoned facilities toward a supply shed that showed signs of recent occupation, including fresh tire tracks, disturbed vegetation, and the lingering scents that indicated human presence within the previous 24 hours. David approached the shed with extreme caution, knowing that Ellis possessed both the desperation of a cornered criminal and the skills necessary to defend himself against law enforcement intervention. The confrontation that followed lasted only minutes, but provided answers to questions that had driven the investigation since that first encounter at Jackson's Market weeks earlier. Inside the shed, Ellis sat calmly, as if he had been expecting this moment, showing no surprise or resistance when David entered with weapon drawn and backup positioning themselves around the building. The most shocking discovery was a 3-year-old girl named Madison Reeve, who had been missing from her family for over a month and represented the final piece in a puzzle that had consumed law enforcement resources across multiple states. Madison's condition indicated that she had been heavily sedated and was slowly recovering consciousness as medical personnel arrived to provide immediate care and evaluation. Ellis's capture provided access to information that had been carefully protected throughout the investigation, including the locations of other facilities, the identities of additional network members, and most importantly, intelligence about children who remained missing and needed immediate rescue before they could be moved beyond the reach of American law enforcement agencies. The interrogation revealed that Ellis had been planning to transport Madison across the Canadian border, where she would have disappeared into an international network that made recovery virtually impossible using conventional investigative methods. Blaze's role in tracking Ellis to his final hiding place represented the culmination of weeks of dedicated police work that combined traditional investigative techniques with the unique capabilities that only a highly trained K-9 partner could provide in situations where human senses and intuition proved inadequate for detecting crucial evidence and, following complex scent trails across vast distances and challenging terrain, the abandoned campground near the Canadian border represented the final chapter in a pursuit that had tested every resource available to law enforcement agencies across multiple states, bringing together federal agents, local police, K-9 units, and specialized rescue teams in a coordinated effort to prevent Ellis from escaping international jurisdiction with Madison Reeve. The facility had been closed for environmental reasons years earlier, but its remote location and existing infrastructure made it perfect for someone who needed to remain hidden while preparing for a border crossing that would place him beyond the reach of American law enforcement. David and Blaze approached the area with extreme caution, knowing that Ellis possessed both the desperation of a cornered criminal and the skills necessary to defend himself against intervention, possibly using Madison as leverage in negotiations that could turn deadly if handled incorrectly by inexperienced personnel. The terrain surrounding the campground provided numerous advantages for someone familiar with wilderness survival, including multiple escape routes through dense forest, natural defensive positions among rocky outcroppings, and access to water sources that could sustain someone for extended periods if necessary. Blaze's behavior indicated that Ellis had been using the location for several days, possibly waiting for contact from associates who could facilitate his escape across the border or provide transportation to another safe house within the trafficking network. The German Shepherd's nose led them through abandoned camping areas toward a maintenance building that showed signs of recent occupation, including fresh tire tracks that matched the pattern from Ellis's vehicle and disturbed vegetation that indicated someone had been moving equipment or supplies in preparation for departure. David coordinated with federal agents to establish a perimeter around the building, while ensuring that medical personnel were standing by to provide immediate care for Madison, whose condition remained unknown after weeks of captivity and probable sedation that could have caused serious health complications requiring immediate intervention. The confrontation itself lasted only minutes, but provided closure to an investigation that had consumed weeks of intensive effort and revealed the existence of a trafficking network that operated across state lines with sophisticated methods designed to exploit weaknesses in law enforcement coordination and legal jurisdiction. Ellis offered no resistance when David entered the building with weapon drawn, sitting calmly beside Madison as if he had been expecting this moment and had already accepted the inevitable outcome of his capture by authorities who had systematically dismantled his operation through persistent investigation and superior resources. The most shocking aspect of the arrest was Ellis's apparent relief at being caught, suggesting that the pressure of running a criminal organization while avoiding law enforcement had become more burdensome than the prospect of facing federal charges that would likely result in life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Madison's rescue represented the successful conclusion of an investigation that had saved 28 children from a trafficking network that treated them as inventory rather than human beings deserving protection and care from society. Medical examination revealed that she had been heavily sedated but was otherwise physically unharmed, though psychological evaluation would be necessary to assess the long-term impact of her captivity and determine appropriate treatment for trauma that could affect her development for years to come. Ellis's interrogation provided intelligence that led to additional arrests and the discovery of other facilities used by the trafficking network, effectively dismantling an organization that had operated successfully for years while avoiding detection through careful planning and exploitation of jurisdictional boundaries that complicated law enforcement coordination. The extraordinary partnership between David Logan and Blaze that proved instrumental in dismantling a multi-state trafficking network was built upon years of intensive training that transformed a naturally intelligent German Shepherd into an elite law enforcement tool capable of detecting evidence and tracking suspects across vast distances and challenging terrain. Canine training programs represent some of the most demanding and specialized education available in law enforcement, requiring both human and canine participants to master skills that combine natural instincts with learned behaviors that can mean the difference between life and death in critical situations. Blaze's training began when he was just 8 weeks old, starting with basic obedience and socialization, exercises designed to build confidence and establish the foundation for more advanced skills that would be developed over months of daily practice and repetition. The selection process for police dogs eliminates candidates who lack the specific combination of intelligence, physical capability, and temperament necessary for law enforcement work, with only a small percentage of dogs demonstrating the qualities needed to succeed in such demanding roles. German Shepherds like Blaze are particularly well suited for police work because of their natural protective instincts, high intelligence, physical strength, and ability to form strong bonds with human partners that facilitate communication and coordination during complex operations. The training regimen includes scent detection work that teaches dogs to identify specific odors associated with drugs, explosives, human remains, and in specialized cases like trafficking investigations, the chemical signatures left by fear, stress, and sedatives that indicate the presence of victims who may be unable to call for help. Physical conditioning prepares K9 officers for extended pursuits across varied terrain, teaching them to navigate obstacles, climb barriers, and maintain focus on their target, despite distractions that might cause ordinary dogs to lose concentration or become confused about their objectives. Blaze's ability to track Ellis across multiple states and diverse environments was the result of hundreds of hours of practice in controlled situations that gradually increased in complexity and difficulty, building his confidence and teaching him to trust his instincts, even when human handlers couldn't detect the evidence he was following. The partnership between David and Blaze required both participants to learn new forms of communication that relied heavily on body language, vocal cues, and mutual trust that developed through shared experiences in training scenarios and real-world situations that tested their ability to work together under pressure. Handler training teaches police officers to interpret their dog's behavior and understand the subtle signals that indicate when the animal has detected something significant, requiring human partners to suppress their own instincts and follow their canine's lead, even when conventional logic suggests a different course of action. The success of canine teams in complex investigations like the trafficking case depends on the handler's ability to trust their partner's capabilities completely, even when the dog's behavior seems to contradict evidence that appears obvious to human observation or contradicts the logical conclusions that would normally guide police work. Ongoing training maintains and refines the skills that both human and canine partners need to remain effective throughout their careers, with regular practice sessions, certification requirements, and continuing education that keeps teams current with evolving criminal methods and new challenges that require adaptive responses. The bond between David and Blaze, that proved so crucial in saving 28 children, represents the highest achievement possible in canine law enforcement, demonstrating how the combination of human determination and canine instinct can accomplish things that neither could achieve alone when facing criminals who exploit society's most vulnerable members. The aftermath of the trafficking network investigation reverberated through law enforcement agencies across the western United States, fundamentally changing how missing children cases are handled and demonstrating the critical importance of interagency cooperation in combating crimes that exploit jurisdictional boundaries and bureaucratic limitations. 28 children were ultimately rescued from various facilities and transportation systems operated by Ellis and his associates, each representing a family reunited and a future restored after weeks or months of unimaginable trauma that will require years of specialized treatment and support to overcome completely. The investigation led to federal legislation that improved communication between state agencies and established protocols for sharing information about missing children cases that cross state lines, closing loopholes that had allowed criminals like Ellis to operate successfully for extended periods without detection. David Logan and Blaze received numerous commendations for their role in exposing and dismantling the trafficking network, but the recognition that meant most to them came from the families of rescued children who credited their partnership with saving lives that might otherwise have been lost forever in a system designed to make people disappear without trace. The case became a training example used in law enforcement academies across the country, illustrating how the combination of traditional investigative techniques and specialized K-9 capabilities can achieve results that neither approach could accomplish independently when facing sophisticated criminal organizations. Blaze's ability to detect evidence that human investigators missed proved instrumental not only in this specific case, but in changing how police departments utilize their K-9 resources in complex investigations that require tracking across vast distances and challenging terrain. The psychological impact on the rescued children varied significantly depending on their age, length of captivity, and individual resilience, but all benefited from specialized treatment programs that had been developed specifically for trafficking victims and their unique needs for security, trust building, and gradual reintegration into normal life experiences. Madison Reeve, the last child rescued from Ellis's custody, made a remarkable recovery and was ultimately adopted by a family that understood her history and provided the stability necessary for healing from trauma that could have affected her. Development permanently, if not addressed properly through professional intervention. The investigation revealed that trafficking networks often target society's most vulnerable populations, specifically because they understand that these victims are less likely to be missed immediately or to receive the level of attention and resources that would make recovery more probable through conventional search methods. Ellis received multiple life sentences without possibility of parole, but his prosecution provided intelligence that led to additional arrests and the identification of other criminal organizations operating similar schemes in different regions, suggesting that the problem extends far beyond what any single investigation can address completely. The partnership between David and Blaze continued for several more years after the trafficking case, with their success leading to assignments on increasingly complex investigations that required their specialized skills and demonstrated track record of achieving results in situations where conventional methods had proven inadequate. Their story serves as a reminder that evil often hides behind ordinary appearances and operates in plain sight, but that dedicated professionals with the right tools and unwavering commitment to justice can expose even the most carefully concealed crimes and bring hope to victims who had every reason to believe that rescue was impossible. The question that haunts investigators who worked on this case is not what they accomplished, but what other networks remain undiscovered, continuing to operate in the shadows while law enforcement agencies struggle with limited resources and jurisdictional challenges that make comprehensive solutions difficult to achieve despite the best intentions and efforts of those sworn to protect society's most vulnerable members. And you, have you ever witnessed any heroic animal act? Tell us your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next videos.